From the city to suburbs, explore local topics on business, industry, education, and government on Target Success with Jerry Wolfgang.
Welcome to Target Success. Our weekly cable television program brings us guests from the fields of government, business, industry, education, and economic development. Today we have with us as our guest Senator Rob Ortt. Welcome, Senator.
Good to be with you, Jerry.
This show has been on with cable television for over 15 years. I don't even want to date when I did the first ones. It's been a while since we had a show. This is the first one since COVID-19. And I just can't believe it's taken so long that this disease, this sickness, has caused the problems it's caused. How did COVID-19 affect the New York State Senate and government in general?
Well, I think, we're very familiar, I think at this point, a lot of your viewers, of the impact that it had across the state. Former Governor Cuomo, the mandates, the restrictions on business, on education, on restaurants, on going out. So I think at this point we're certainly familiar with the government's response to COVID-19. But as far as our role in Albany in the legislature, the Capitol was closed all last session. So normally you can come down when we're in session Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and you have access as a citizen, as the public. You have access to the Capitol building. You have access to our offices. You can come in. You can schedule a meeting. You can go in and watch the Senate proceedings on the floor or the Assembly proceedings. None of that happened. It was the legislators, some of the staff, reduced amount of staff, and that was it. So it really was, it was very different for us. We have 7 new members in the Republican conference, and I told all of them, I said, next year, hopefully, is going to be nothing like this year. So next year when the public's there, it's a very different, there's a real energy to the building, obviously, when you have constituents there and you have people protesting and people advocating for issues. None of that was going on. So at times I felt like we were operating almost, I don't want to say in secret, but without the public there, without government affairs folks and people advocating and lobbying. It was just a very different feel to the New York State Capitol this past year.
And all your meetings, I believe, were Zoom. So if you had committee meetings, it was done by Zoom. I can't stand Zoom. I had to do them on a regular basis for economic development, for the Industrial Development Agency, for the College Community Board of Trustees here. I had Zoom meetings every day. And
as did I.
It didn't seem like I was really in the main effort of what I should be doing.
Yeah, when I was in the military, I remember when I first joined, they gave me an MRE, which is a meal ready to eat, and I thought it was the coolest thing. I remember thinking, this is great, I could eat these all the time. By the time I left Afghanistan, if I never saw another MRE, it would be too soon. I feel the same way with Zoom. In the beginning, I thought, this is great. We can still have meetings. You can still, communicate with people. And it is something that I think is going to be here for the rest of our lives, but it certainly was a poor substitute for in-person meetings, in-person engagement. So much of our lives today anyways are remote or through technology or whatever. But I think, Zoom education, Zoom meetings in lieu of actual meetings was a poor substitute. I'm kind of like you. If I can do a meeting today in person, I will choose that over a Zoom meeting.
Then we get into what's going on in Washington with I hate to say President Biden, because of all the different things, legislative ideas, the funding, dollars coming to families now, unemployment caused because of that, now people not working. What is your reaction? It just seems like this is a different life now with what's happening because of the efforts in Washington.
Well, I think, what I hear from a lot of constituents and what I see really is it's a breakdown, I think, in the priorities of regular New Yorkers and Americans and the priorities that we're seeing in Washington, D.C. first. But number two is they can't even spit anything out. So even though you hear all this effort, all this posturing and all these different priorities, nothing is coming of it. But we still have no bill, all this talk about the infrastructure bill and the funding. But the problem is it's not just infrastructure, right? There's all kinds of other things in there. And certainly, I know a lot of people are upset about the potential funding, settlement funding going to illegal immigrant families who were separated at the border. In New York State, we're no stranger to that. We put aside $2 billion in last year's state budget, $2 billion for unemployment benefits to those in the country illegally. Now, what's most galling about that is we spent $1 billion. So we spent 2 times more for folks who are here illegally than we did for business relief at a time when we were forcing businesses to close. And of course, what does that business relief do? It helps them hire back employees. I think for a lot of folks, when they look at these priorities, there's a question of who are we really working for? Who are we benefiting? Who are we trying to benefit? And I think there's a long sense that Washington is broken. And I think the last year has confirmed not only is it broken, but there seems to be a high level of incompetency. And that's there's intentional things that happen that I disagree with, but there's also been a high level of incompetency in this administration over the last year. That should be concerning for everybody.
Taxes. It seems that in New York State, we don't have to go federal, just New York State, our friends in Albany, mostly from New York City, seem to want to raise taxes of everybody.
Well, not only seem to, they did. We raised taxes last year. Now, last year, at the start of the budget process, we were looking at a budget deficit due to COVID-19, but also due to our state's ability to spend far more than we take in. We received $12 billion, over $12 billion, from the federal government as part of the American Recovery Act, right? The first law signed by President Biden. $12 billion. That wiped away any budget deficit. And even now, we're told by the comptroller that revenues are coming in, I think, $4 billion higher than projected. Yet still, we increased taxes by $4.3 billion. The New York State budget today is $212 billion. When I was first elected, it was about $180 billion. That was only 7 years ago. It wasn't like I'd been there for 40 years. So it's gone up significantly. And what I think a lot of my colleagues from New York City fail to understand is that the cost of being in New York is very often the reason why people leave New York. It's the reason why employers don't invest more in New York. It's why they don't hire more people in New York. And it's why people who retire, they leave. Because the cost of being here is so expensive, and especially today when people are more mobile. People are more mobile today than they've ever been in our country's history. So they can easily pick up and now with Zoom, now you can work remotely. And you can work for a company in Pennsylvania and be living in your house in New York, or vice versa, working for a company in New York and living in your house in Pennsylvania where you pay taxes and all that kind of stuff. So I think we're going to have a real reckoning with our inability to stop taxing people and spending their money and people who are leaving the state.
Now, with COVID-19, we certainly had an effect on tourism, although it seems the city of Niagara Falls, for whatever reason, with our problems with not being able to go to Canada or Canadians coming here, tourism looked pretty busy on weekends. But what did the state do with tourism?
Well, the issue with the border was obviously a federal issue, and inexplicably, the federal government did not reopen. The United States federal government did not reopen the border to Canadian citizens. So even though their vaccinations and inoculation against COVID-19 was significantly higher than New York's in the United States, we would not re-enter, we would not allow them to come into the country, even though we could go to Canada. So I can't believe that that was good for Niagara Falls. I know some of the data will show that Niagara Falls, didn't have some of the tourism was good. More people, I guess, maybe more people from New York or from the United States were going to Niagara Falls and places like that, and that's great. But you can't tell me that an open Canadian border wouldn't be better for Niagara Falls, Western New York specifically. You and I both know this. That is a huge part of our economy here, is Canadians coming across that border, spending their money, and then obviously vice versa. So, I think a lot of us were advocating very hard to the federal government to reopen the border. It's going to reopen, I believe, this month officially, and we'll see how that goes. But, it's a lifeline economically for Western New York to have that cross-border traffic.
We just got over the election. We don't have the results. This program is being done before the results are known. And there were several items on the back of the ballot, kind of unusual, but on the back of the ballot. Not a place I want to go to get information. And it seemed like the negative part came out stronger than anything positive. In other words, people learned about it because of what was wrong with it. Tell us about that.
Yeah, this is not uncommon in the sense that a lot of ballot propositions, a lot of people, whenever there's a ballot proposition, a lot of times you don't really know there's not a lot of coverage around that ballot proposition. We have tried to make voters aware of the back of the ballot. As you said, you have to turn the ballot over. So hopefully voters did that when they went to vote this past week. And there were five, but there were three specific propositions that will affect elections in New York State if they pass for years to come, for generations. And it affects redistricting. The first ballot proposition would actually undermine the Independent Redistricting Commission, which was created by voters in 2014. It would undermine that and make it easier for partisan redistricting, which we know voters reject. We know voters want to choose their elected officials. They don't want elected officials choosing their voters. This proposition absolutely is very harmful to an independent redistricting commission. It would also allow illegal immigrants to be counted in the census data. Then you have Proposition 3, which would be same-day voter registration with no voter ID. So you show up on the day of, the ballot worker has no way to verify you are who you are, that you haven't voted that day, that you live where you live. If there was voter ID, then this proposition would be no problem. But without voter ID, it raises a lot of concerns. And then Proposition 4 would allow for ballot harvesting in New York. So right now you can request, as you know, an absentee ballot if you're out of town, if you're sick, if you can't get to the polls. This would make no excuse absentee voting. So you can just request an absentee ballot by mail for any reason. But we know that in other states that have done this, it has opened up legal ballot harvesting in those states. So for those reasons, I voted no this past Tuesday, and I hope a lot of other people did as well.
Well, we'll know soon as to that. Explain to me about redistricting. Redistricting isn't going on for the next year's election, but there will be redistricting taking place somehow with the old system if this new system doesn't pass.
Right. So we don't yet know what redistricting will look like. There's an independent redistricting commission created by the people of New York back in 2014. They have produced 2 maps. There's a draft maps, and currently the public is able to comment on those maps. There's public hearings all over the state happening right now that the public can weigh in. They can comment on those maps. Ultimately, the Independent Redistricting Commission is tasked with producing 1 map, and there's Republican commissioners, there's Democratic commissioners, and there's also minor party commissioners. They have to create 1 map, but this all has to be done at some point before next year's elections. So come January, February, there has to be a final redistricting map that is created. If the IRC can't do it, the legislature draws the maps. Now, we know what the legislature will do. They will draw partisan maps. They will draw maps that are favor, in this case, the Democrats, congressionally, Senate, and Assembly, even though the voters approved an independent process. So, there could be a legal challenge to that. So there's a lot of things that are going to happen before we have a final map, but we have to have that final map by time petitions hit the street at the end of February.
That's truly amazing. The local redistricting for the county legislature, I would imagine, and the cities and the villages, whatever, that will be done locally, not by the state.
That's correct.
And I believe the county already has a legislative map that they had their group look at to try and do.
Yep.
So that's interesting developments to look forward to. Hopefully the redistricting will provide fair districts for everyone.
Correct. And that's what we want. We want fair lines as opposed to partisan lines.
A few years ago, you were able to create, when there was some surplus funds and some work that you did with tourism, a fund that would help develop projects in the city of Niagara Falls. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that was actually at the time we were negotiating some changes to the compact between the Seneca Nation and the state of New York. Now, of course, today that is a much more contested situation between the Seneca Nation and the state of New York, and I'm hopeful with the new governor that can be rectified. But we were able to, in that negotiation, I pushed for a specific fund, a specific pot of money that would go to economic development within 2 miles of the casino in Niagara Falls. That was very important both to the Senecas and to stakeholders. You had this casino, but in the immediate vicinity around that casino, it did not look great. And so the idea was, let's invest some of this money, economic development dollars, into brick and mortar economic development, job creation in and around the casino, because as we bring more people down there, more people will go to the casino. There'll be more things for those people to do when they're not at the casino, and you sort of build this engine for your city, which Niagara Falls, as we both know, is in desperate need of a strong economic engine in the city. And that was the idea behind the funding. We did secure several $1 million over 2 or 3 years. There is a lot of that money has been pushed out, but I think there still is $1 million or so left in that pot for development, and ultimately that's managed by the Niagara County IDA.
Yes, and I'm certainly familiar with that, serving on the IDA, and it's gone to some great projects. And certainly that's a revolving fund, so that money comes back to be used again and again.
That's right.
Which I think is the best part of it, because now it's not just being used once.
Correct. And that was the idea. We wanted a revolving fund, locally managed and controlled by local stakeholders who understood. And as you know, we've had different applicants. They come in, they make their pitch, and then the steering committee makes a recommendation, and then the actual IDA makes the final determination. But we've seen some really good applicants and some good projects there.
Now, I think we've mentioned unemployment. Unemployment it is something that we at the community college are constantly looking at. One of the things we've been looking at is setting up welding training within the college so that we can train people for these new machine companies that are coming out and higher technology. It just seems to me that there's an area that we need assistance and we need to get people into.
Yeah, I mean, you have two sides of the same coin, right? There's unemployment, and then you have job training. Obviously, the goal with job training, whether it's community college, whether it's the Niagara Orleans BOCES, whether it's different apprentice programs, the point is to both put people and place people where there are jobs in the community, but also to sometimes retrain folks, right, who they may lose their job or they may want to start a different career, and you retrain those folks for skills in the industries that are in your community. And as you sort of pointed out there, you know, today, a welder, it's not your grandfather's welder, right? You know, if you had someone in your family that was a welder 30 years ago, it's a very different industry today. When I go into manufacturing facilities, these facilities today, the amount of technology and computers that are in these manufacturing shops. And the knowledge and skill sets that you need in those manufacturing jobs aren't the skills that you would have needed 30 years ago. And so it's a smarter workforce today. I don't care if you're doing trades or you're working in an office building. It's a smarter skill set that is needed. And so that's why I think the job training programs are so important. The state invests heavily in those kinds of programs. On the unemployment side, though, look, the unemployment was a disaster. The state unemployment system was not prepared to handle. Here we were closing companies down. They then laid people off, and we did not have the infrastructure in place to handle that sort of deluge. I still don't know if it happened all over again. I don't know if we would be any better today, and that's the real shame of it. But hopefully we have more people at work, because I believe, look at it, Jerry, if you are an able-bodied New Yorker and you're watching this program or you're out there today, you should be working. There are jobs available. We have I believe firmly we have too many people right now, able-bodied New Yorkers and Americans, that are sitting at home because they're making some calculation that that's a better, maybe they have too much free money or whatever it might be. The bottom line is we need to make it more, there needs to be more of an incentive to be at work than to stay at home. And I think that's a real challenge coming out of COVID-19.
Well, you said you've been there over 7 years, and when you've been there, you dealt with the governor that really wasn't your friend. and now I guess we couldn't have foreseen this happening. It's like an adventure. It's like a fiction novel, what's happened. And now we hear that he might be arrested. Tell us, what is your feeling about this? It just is so dramatic, and now we have a new governor.
Yeah, I mean, look, since we've been here last, obviously a lot has happened. You were saying we've been in the program, or you've been doing the program 15 years. Sometimes it feels like 15 years worth of stuff happened since I was last here. Andrew Cuomo is no longer the governor, which would have seemed unimaginable 3 years ago, 2 years ago, even a year ago. And he, at the end, like so many fictional tragedies, he was brought down really by his own doing, his own hand, right? His own actions led to his downfall. It's a story that's been told since the ancient Greeks. He thought he was untouchable. He thought he could do whatever he wanted to do. And that was not new, but obviously what came out with the women, multiple women, the nursing home scandal, the book deal, the COVID, the friends and family COVID testing, all of these things suddenly sort of all came together, and obviously he resigned in disgrace. And now, just like anyone else, by the way, anyone else that would have been charged with what he's being charged with, forcibly touching a woman against her will, you and I would be arrested, and he should be no different. It sounds like he will be no different. He will be arrested for that, and he'll have his day in court, and he deserves that. But so that's been a huge development in Albany when he was the governor for 11 years. And that's a long time, as you know, to be in that role. And now we have a new governor from Western New York, of all places, someone who represented this area in Congress when she was a member of the House. And, Governor Kathy Hochul. I know there's a lot of hope to have someone from Western New York in the governor's mansion. And she's going to have a significant year ahead of her. She's going to have a primary in June, and then obviously a general election in November if she makes it through the primary. So we'll see. The next few months, if you thought the last few months were stranger than fiction, I think the next few months are going to be, there's going to be a lot going on. That Democratic governor primary is going to have a real impact on the legislative session coming up.
Well, just since we've set your program up, we have the Attorney General running in that primary. And as I read the New York Post, it seems like there's 2, maybe 3 more people that are thinking about running in the Democratic primary.
Yeah, I'm hearing from my sources that outgoing Mayor Bill de Blasio, why not, is going to take a shot at it. Jumaane Williams, who is the public advocate. What's interesting about him is he actually ran a primary against Lieutenant Governor Hochul for the lieutenant governor's spot a couple years ago, as you might remember. and lost. But he is rumored to be very interested in taking a run. And then maybe Tom Suozzi from Long Island has been looking and making some noise statewide. So, look on the Democratic side, it's rare to have an open seat. You have a brand new governor in there, Governor Hochul, and so I think you're going to have a lot of folks jump in. I think it's going to drive the party potentially further to the political left, and we've already seen the danger, whether it's crime, whether it's the cost of living in New York with the new taxes, whether it's the horrible business climate, whether it's the impact on education, all these things that have come out over the last couple of years with one-party control. And it'll be interesting to see where this primary takes the Democratic Party and who emerges.
You reminded me certainly of another issue that we've sort of have not mentioned, and it's certainly something I know that you're very strong on, and that's guns. It seems like crime is up. Defending the police is not something now nationally that people want to do. Defunding the police, what are your feelings about that?
Well, I've made my feelings pretty clear. Whenever I've had the opportunity, I am a supporter of law enforcement. I never thought that would be like an actual debate. And that doesn't mean, by the way, Jerry, all this talk about, making sure we're funding mental health and funding, training for police officers and other. We already do that in the state of New York. When I was mental health chair, we funded what were known as crisis intervention training, which was training set up for law enforcement for them to be able to identify someone having a mental health crisis, and therefore they would handle that differently than they would, if it wasn't someone having a mental health crisis, right? So there's already funding for mental health services. There's funding for training for police officers. And I'm all for even doing more on that front. But to advocate defunding, cutting police departments at a time when violent crime is up, murders are up, assaults, robberies are up, rapes, all these kinds of, some of the worst crimes are up. And it's not an accident. It's not a coincidence. And at the same time, you mentioned guns. At the same time that, illegal guns and shootings are up, we're also pushing to further restrict the rights of law-abiding people to have a gun to defend themselves. It almost defies logic to me. We should be making it easier for law-abiding people to protect themselves and harder for bad people to harm them. And we're doing the exact opposite.
Senator Ortt, 28 minutes flies by. I want to thank you very much for being with us today. We've talked about some very important issues that I'm sure our listening audience wanted to get more information about. I want to thank our listening audience also for tuning in. And we hope that you'll be able to tune in again to next week to Target Success.